Hello and welcome to the video. An updated deep dive into one of gaming's greatest mysteries spanning from 1998 all the way to 2025. A journey beginning with nostalgia, innocence, confusion, enigmatic player discoveries, red herrings, conspiracies, recreations of long lost events, and information from game developers, including new intel from December 2025. I'll put you right at the start as a kid in 1998 experiencing this mystery from the very beginning, so buckle up your shorts and your backpacks, you're in for one heck of a flight. Before delving into the fairy tale turned nightmare of a mystery that we would call Stop N SWOP, first we need to set the scene, the zeitgeist of 1998. Children, and let's face it, probably adults too, sat down to play Banjo Kazooie. The internet was slow back then, so if you got stuck, you were better off buying a Prima guide and looking up the solution, rather than waiting for a 56k modem to load up a page at a snail's pace. So here I go, as a child, exploring the second stage of Banjo Kazooie, Treasure Trove Cove. Heading to the southeast, it is easy to discover Shark Food Island, an isolated rock formation out at sea. Even as a child, I sensed something eerie about it. A sense that this would spur on schoolyard rumours, akin to the Mew under the truck rumours of Pokemon Generation 1. I think one reason I was semi-suspicious of Shark Food Island is that it reminded me of Kramatoa from Donkey Kong Country 3, another game by Rare. Despite my suspicions as a kid, I was aware developers embellished worlds to make them appear more lived in. Not to mention having seen plenty of wobbly textures on early PlayStation 1 and PC games, you could never be sure if it was simply a wall you were looking at or a secret door. More often than not, it was just simply a wall. Any doubts I had as a kid could have been quashed had I realised this camera trick lets you see the secret entrance. Back to 1998 and continuing to play Banjo Kazooie. While exploring Bubble Gloop Swamp and Clanker's Cavern, nothing there grabbed my attention in the form of odd feelings, nothing mysterious. However, Freeze Easy Pete decided to slap me across the face with blatancy. Upon entering Wazza's cave and jumping on a ledge to save a Jinjo, I found myself face to face with a haunting yet frustrating sight. Behind a clear slab of frozen ice, a gigantic, majestical ice key sat upon a podium in a silent, glistening cave. Nothing I did could see me break the ice wall that the key sat behind. It taunted me, and I suspect it taunted others too. It was unlike any other collectible. Perhaps this key was part of some quest later on in the game and would help us unlock a Jiggy, except that never happened. The ice key, the only secret item visible in the game in a regular playthrough. The game wants you to see it, ironically burning this mysterious ice key into your mind. It is hard to leave it behind. Maybe the key will be of use later. Onto Gobi's Valley, this sealed ancient door embedded into the cliffside. As a kid, I did get a strange sense of this, potentially be more than what appears to the eye. However, as with Shop Food Island, I chalked it up to level detail. Sure, kinda mysterious, but probably just environment building. Nothing to see here, right? Jumping ahead, and Banjo Kazooie is 100% completed. All of the jiggies, the music notes have been collected, and Grunty has been defeated. Now we can relax and enjoy the ending, a special bonus ending. For our efforts, Mumbo Jumbo will show us photographs of secrets that we missed, items that we will use in the next game, Banjo Tooie. Imagine to my surprise, the suspicious Shop Food Island was now raised out of the ocean, revealing an entrance to the inside. I wonder what is inside there. Oh, and the Ice Key in Wazza's cave? Well, we've seen that before. Mumbo also shows the ancient door open inside Gobi's Valley. My vague suspicions about Shop Food Island and the ancient door had both finally been confirmed. Wow! Inside the sarcophagus is a blue mystery egg. These photos gave us our first glimpse of what would be known as the mystery eggs. Meanwhile, inside Shop Food Island, atop a tower, a pink mystery egg. Now, having witnessed these secrets, I rushed back to Treasure Trove Cove, back to Shop Food Island, to discover it was all still at the bottom of the ocean, in silent solitude, with the mystery pink egg still inside. The ice key remained in its chamber in solitude, in its freezing chamber, probably reflecting the sharp icy pain players felt when discovering that it was still locked away. Access to the majestic ice key was still denied. Disappointingly, the blue mystery egg still sealed in the sarcophagus in the secret tomb of Gobi Valley. And this is where this secret would remain. All three secrets locked away. All three secret areas forbidden. However, some secrets and forbidden areas would remain untouched for much longer than one secret in particular. We move on a couple of months or so. Banjo Kazooie has been completed by many, and many have witnessed the bonus ending revealing the mystery eggs and the ice key. Again, this is 1998. The internet very much is in its infancy. Banjo Kazooie has its own official website, and alongside that, Rareware, the game developers, have their own independent website as well. Fans could send in questions. Usually, Rare would reply with sarcasm and humour, never giving a straight answer, exemplified by this screenshot of the old Rareware Rumour Mill website. Questions concerning the secret items, the two mystery eggs and the ice key, came flooding in. However, no matter how many people questioned these, we never received a proper answer. As a bonus blast to the past, while researching, I stumbled across this Banjo fan website, almost 26 years old, hosted by Tripod. I've no idea how this fan site lasted for so long, but the internet was filled with sites like this in the early 2000s. This truly is something to be treasured. While people anxiously waited for Banjo Tooie, in the deep dark corners of the internet, some naughty folk were hatching plans to enter the forbidden areas. Now, you need to remember, ROM hacking, ROM dumping and scanning game code content was not any easy feat, especially in 1998. The most likely way to explore a game's secrets was with a GameShock cheat device, a cart which you would place the game cart on top of. This essentially allowed the user to pick and change data in the game's memory location using hexadecimal code. The user would still need to take precautions, as many people have reported permanently messing up the game's memory. As further example of the time period, even seasoned game hackers would struggle to find secrets in Banjo Kazooie for another 2 years. The mystery eggs posed a problem in particular. In order to collect them, you would need to load the areas which they were in. Since they were behind load screens in sealed off locations, this made it extremely difficult. However, one secret item and its area were different: the ice key. In its quiet, mysterious ice chamber, the only thing keeping the gamer's hands off the ice key was the sheet of ice that was impenetrable. In my naivety as a youngster, I had attempted to use the Turbomb Talon trot shoes from Bogey's Salon Race to run inside Waz's cave, hoping to smash through the ice walls with the lightning fast speed. To no avail, of course. The ice key, however, was and is a loaded asset in the game world. If only we could burrow under the floor and pop up on the other side of the ice wall. Or what if we go over it? There's no way for Kazooie to fly in Waz's cave, but someone, somewhere, managed to figure out a code on a cheat device using what would be known as a moon jump code. Banjo could now float high above Waz's cave and, due to there being no roof, drop into the ice key chamber. Collecting the ice key would result in a thunderous regal fanfare. The satisfaction of robbing the ice key is short-lived, however. The ice wall still blocks the entrance. The illegitimate feeling of cheating to nab the ice key ultimately raises more questions. Still, how would one truly open the ice chamber? And this theme of satisfaction leading to more questions is something that would continue going forward. With the ice key collected, a new menu in the pause screen would be unlocked entitled Stop N SWOP. To quote raregamer.co.uk, who has an amazing article on the subject, picking up the ice key would essentially unlock Pandora's box. Bonus fun fact round. Question: which two Stop N SWOP items would eventually, 15 years later on from 1998, be obtainable without a cheat device by using in-game glitches? Answer: the ice key with the reverse B adventure glitch and the blue mystery egg with an out of bounds glitch. Obviously, these methods are still illegitimate acquisitions of the Stop N SWOP items, since the ice barrier and the ancient door remain sealed. However, I wanted to bring attention to Grunty's amazing hard work and effort, and I feel like as a video chronicling Stop N SWOP, it would feel incomplete without mentioning the achievements by Grunty. Credit goes to Grunty for the current 2 clips that you see on the screen, and if you wish to see more, head over to our YouTube channel where there is a playlist of Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie glitches. I want to point out that it actually took Grunty's over 5 hours to record the out of bounds glitch in Gobi's Valley to acquire the blue mystery egg, so the chances of anybody doing that by mistake in a playthrough is very unlikely. The story picks up in the early 2000s over at the Rare Witch Project, a fan site dedicated to Banjo Kazooie. Here, 2 uber game hackers, Ice Mario and Subdrag, make an astonishing discovery within the game. they manage to find code deep in Banjo's game pack, which triggers and activates the secret areas to open up. The ice wall, gone. The ancient door, open. Shark Food Island, raised out of the ocean, standing proud and ready to be plundered. Basically, Ice, Mario and Subdrag had tricked the game with the Game Shark to open up the secret Stop and Swap areas. The truly astonishing discovery, however, was that there are in fact 6 mystery eggs and not just 2, as were previously only believed to exist. Another interesting discovery worth noting was that entering a secret area in a legitimate fashion would trigger an ostentatious fanfare and musical cue that played, adding a grand sense of mystery to the area which holds the secret item. I bring this up because previously moon jumping to the ice key negated the entrance fanfare and secret area music, and honestly this helps to explain and highlight why moon jumping to the ice key left us with such a cheap feeling and something felt quite unsatisfactory. Now onto the collection of the ice key. I want to spend a moment to appreciate Grant Kirkhope's work here musically. Each Stop and Swap secret item area has its own musical variation. As you may have heard a moment ago, the music inside Shark Food Island takes on a more beach shanty style, while the theme inside the icy chamber takes on a more glacial sound, comprised of a glockenspiel and pizzicato strings. Wow, that didn't roll off the tongue easily. Standing in this once illustrious chamber that once held the ice key, now it feels even chillier and mysterious.
Huh?
Yes, Kazooie. We'll talk about those 4 mystery eggs in a moment, but first of all, let's talk about Gobi's Valley. The ancient Stop and Swap tube in Gobi's Valley possibly has my favourite of the Stop and Swap themes, including an Egyptian sounding flute and a theremin. You truly felt like you were raiding a long lost tomb, forbidden for anyone to enter. We should not be stealing the mystery eggs, at least not yet. As touched upon briefly, Game Sharks were not common back in 1999 and the early 2000s, but my friend did purchase one, and with the codes released by Ice Mario and Subdrag to open up the secret areas, it was time to do the forbidden. With the Game Shark hack codes entered, I took control of Banjo and headed towards Shark Food Island in Treasure Trove Cove. It was an intimidating and haunting sight to be swimming towards an area that was still supposed to be submerged underneath the ocean. You know, as opposed to towering eye in the hair, exposing my misbehaviour of tricking the game into opening a secret area so that I could plunder it. Now with the mystery pink egg in hand, I headed over to Wazza's cave in Freezeezy Peak. Then I grabbed the ice key. It felt like I'd done something illegal. the sentiment echoed by the mischievous sounding ice key chamber music tinkling in the background. Of course, I grabbed the blue egg in the tomb too. The feeling of having done something sinful washed over me. On June the 9th, 1999, Rare released the Tepid Seat segment on their website. Fans had emailed a multitude of questions. Most of the questions pertained to the development of Banjo Kazooie. Questions regarding secrets creeped up too. Remember, it is 1999. Game Sharks were a secondary peripheral. Not many people had access to one. So even if you heard that hackers had entered secret areas, only a select few with Game Sharks could actually access them too. As you can see on screen, question 31 quizzes. Are there any other locations in Banjo Kazooie that are locked off until the release of Banjo Tooie? Perhaps the closed barrel in Mad Monster Mansion, or the two doors in the Grunty transformation room. So imagine to my surprise to discover that the Game Shark code had opened the metal X sealed wine barrel in Mad Monster Mansion, and it was revealed that a small chamber existed behind it, concealing a cyan egg atop a small platform in a wine cellar. It was amazing to finally see a new hidden location. Loitering around inside the caveat behind the open barrel, you soon realise that the music is similar to the music inside the ancient tomb, with the addition of ghoulish laughter and Gruntilda's evil cackling. For those curious, using a clip-through walls cheat reveals nothing but a black void. The secret chamber egg are not loaded until the data sent from Banjo Tooie is detected by Banjo's game pack. Anyway, while it is great to see a new secret area, a secret item being bundled into the back of a wine barrel hardly has the same prestige as the ice key or the... Before I was interrupted by Kazooie, I was going to say the cyan egg's location may lack prestige. However, it is indeed the final secret area in Banjo Kazooie. Yes, the last secret area. Strangely, the next secret is also located in the same level as the cyan egg, in Mad Monster Mansion. So, whereabouts in Mad Monster Mansion is the next mystery egg? Well, the green mystery egg unceremoniously plonked on top of Logo's toiletry system. Sure, the epic fanfare music plays upon entering the room with the green mystery egg inside, but this is a room that is entered during regular gameplay. It is no secret room. Weird. Question 1. Why are there 2 top secret items in Mad Monster Mansion? Meanwhile, some stages have no secrets at all. Question 2. Why is the green egg simply dumped on top of Logo in a non-secret room? Newsflash. Well, I asked the creator of Stop N Swop himself both of these questions, and I got a solid answer, so stay tuned to find out later. Next we will briefly discuss the yellow mystery egg. I say brief because this is the least interesting of them all. In the final stage, Click Clock Woods, during the winter, breaking into Nabnut the Squirrel's house will reveal the yellow mystery egg. This one simply on a table while Nabnut sleeps. Again, the fanfare plays on tapers into the Stop N Swop secret area theme. But this one lacks any gravitas. The music sounds playful, and again, the secret resides in a common area. It feels lackluster. Finally, the red mystery egg in Rusty Bucket Bay. This one placed on a bed, inside a common room. Again, 3 mystery eggs placed on some form of house furniture. Very unsophisticated. Rusty Bucket Bay does hold something interesting. We will explore that later. By the way, the Stop and Swap items are unlocked permanently across all 3 save files on a Banjo Kazooie game pack. Even if the files are erased, the secret forbidden areas remain opened and plundered. Your naughty raiding antics by Game Shark cannot be hidden. This fact highlighted that this was an unusual situation in regards to the Stop and Swap items. Jumping back to the tepid seat, one Banjo Kazooie fan asked if collecting the ice key before Banjo Tooie is released could cause any glitches. Ray responded that if they could come up with a spoil sporty type plan to make Game Shark ice key grabbers regret it, they might just do it. This of course caused panic to anybody that had grabbed the secrets with the Game Shark, including myself. So much so that I signed up to a video game rental store, booked out their copy of Banjo Kazooie and swapped it with my own, just so I wouldn't have the secrets anymore. Skipping ahead to the 12th of April 2001, Banjo Tooie is finally released in Europe. Meanwhile, Banjo Tooie had been released in North America and Japan previously in November 2000. With America having a 6-month head start exploring Banjo Tooie, I avoided the internet in case of spoilers. Not that I was a frequent user of the internet in 2001, this is back when revealing that you used the World Wide Web, that you would get yourself labelled as a gigantic geek. Regardless, Banjo Tooie was a great success. And a lot of fun too. The question was, well, what about Stop and Swap? How would we return to Banjo Kazooie to access the secret items and then transfer them to Banjo Tooie? It would not take long for players and avid followers of the Stop and Swap mystery to find something majorly concerning. In relatively easy to find secret caves at the start of the game in Spiral Mountain, players would discover imprisoned, cute, googly-eyed personifications of the Banjo Kazooie game packs. How could something so cute harbour something so potentially terrifying? Attacking one would cause it to break open, revealing a pink mystery egg, like the one from Sharkfield Island, but much, much smaller. Collecting the egg would result in a lightweight bing sound, a far cry from the loud, thunderous fanfare from Banjo Kazooie. The second Banjo Kazooie game pack, once busted open, drops the blue mystery egg from Gobi's Valley. It is a fraction of the size of the one from the tomb in Banjo Kazooie. These mystery eggs feel like quick compensatory afterthoughts quickly brushed under the rug. In Jinzhou Village, a hardly secret ice cave also contains a Banjo Kazooie game pack. What do you think was inside? Yep, the ice key. The ice key unceremoniously flops out and slaps on the floor like a wet fish. Additionally, the key, once full of majesty, is now the size of a toothpick. Gone are the days of triumph and exuberance that the ice key once held as it rotated out of reach. The ice key now has the dignity of a queen falling from her horse and getting her dress caught in the stirrups. leaving her hanging there in disgrace. Once the secrets in Banjo Tooie were collected, players could take the eggs to Heggy's egg shed. Heggy will hatch the secret eggs, unlocking 2 bonuses in Banjo Tooie. 1. The homing eggs. This would allow Kazooie's eggs to lock onto the enemies when shooting them. The second was the Briggle Bash, where Banjo would slam Kazooie comically into the ground as a melee attack. Curiously, there is already a yellow mystery egg in the shed. Kazooie will need to hatch this. Unlocking a Jinjo in multiplayer mode. Of the so-called secret items in Banjo Tooie, the ice key was the most interesting. In a secluded, quiet corner in the icy side of Hailfire Peaks, a huge sheet of thick, transparent ice shields an ice chamber, housing an ominous, huge ice safe. The safe has a carved out portion, shaped much like the ice key. The implication that this is where the ice key was born and where it belongs. To reach the safe, players would need to access the area via a secret entrance via Glitter Gulch Mine. I will admit that entering the ice chamber with the ice safe did evoke some of the sensations and mystique that the original Stop and Swap mystery items and the secret areas there in Banjo Kazooie evoked. To think the ice key from Wazza's cave was destined to open this ice safe. We finally knew the key's purpose, or so we thought. We will go into that later. The ice key from Banjo Tooie had found its use. Inside the safe, a Mega Glowbo, a collectible that allows Humba Wumba to transform Kazooie into Dragon Kazooie. Did the existence of the small mystery eggs and the small ice key in Banjo Tooie signal and symbolise the death of Stop and Swop? Indeed, to many, Stop and Swap, the aforementioned way of exchanging secret items to Banjo Tooie from Banjo Kazooie, seemed to have been dropped and replaced with this scenario. I was concerned and dubious that we could go back and retrieve the items from Banjo Kazooie and spirit them away to Banjo Tooie. However, there was still one big mystery that provided some hope. To move forward with the story, we need to take a step back to the first game, Banjo Kazooie. During the 1999 Tepid Seat session, question 14 asks, in Mad Monster Mansion, there is a room with 2 pictures, one of Gruntilda and one of this evil pirate bloke. Will the pirate be a villain in Banjo Tooie? Ray responded stating that the pirate has a mission and purpose of his own, but this is not the time or place to reveal the merest hint. In Banjo Tooie, we cut back to Jolly Roger's Lagoon, a peaceful seaside town where a tavern can be found. Entering one of the side rooms reveals something shocking. A giant Captain Blackeye sat in the tavern. But the shocking thing is that there are 3 pictures, one of Treasure Trove Cove from the first game, one of a raised shark food island, and one of the pink mystery egg inside of Shark Food Island. Interacting with Blackeye himself was pointless. He asks you to get in water, which you cannot do, then he collapses in a stupor, then continues to ramble the same dialogue. I had a dream once. A bear stole my glory. looked a bit like you, he did. The ramblings of being in a previous game and his glory being stolen by a bear. In correlation to the pictures of the enigmatic pink mystery egg, it had fans putting their detective hats on. I will cut to the chase. The lines of dialogue are references to the game entitled Dream Land of Giants. It was the original concept for Banjo Kazooie. Captain Blackeye featured in Dream. When Dream evolved into Banjo Kazooie, Banjo effectively stole Blackeye's glory. However, it is likely Blackeye's role in Banjo Tooie was originally bigger. The tepid seat hinted he had a mission and purpose of his own. However, in Banjo Tooie he did nothing but sit beside pictures of references to the secrets in Banjo Kazooie. With Captain Blackeye in mind, we return to investigate the original Banjo Kazooie game. There are two interesting pieces of potential evidence that Blackeye was once much more involved with the Stop N Swop connection. The first was the fact that in Mad Monster Mansion, a room with a huge bed has Blackeye's portrait on the wall. Additionally, a treasure chest similar to the one in the tavern of Banjo Tooie. Some fans speculated that maybe the mystery eggs would be transported to Banjo Tooie from Banjo Kazooie via the chest in Mad Monster Mansion and the chest in the tavern of Banjo Tooie. I will nip that in the bud right away. I never believed the chest opened. It was discovered years later that the chest indeed wasn't designed to be opened. With the chest debunked, one compelling clue resides in Rusty Bucket Bay, where the red mystery egg was found. In Rusty Bucket's navigation room, a large map hangs on the wall. Closer investigation reveals that it is a map of Treasure Trove Cove, and more curiously, that an X marks the spot, right on top of Shark Food Island. Now, at this point in time, it was roughly around the time where I signed up to the Game Facts forums, circa 2001, mostly frequenting the Banjo Kazooie and the Tooie forum. Both forums filling up with many posts about Stop N Swop, many Banjo fans chiming in with their theories and crazy ideas concerning the mystery eggs and the ice key. I remember groups of us assigning ourselves to various levels across Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie, all vowing to investigate and scan certain levels and areas, hoping to find any sign or clue that may trigger the Stop N Swop event, allowing us to exchange the items from Banjo Kazooie over to Banjo Tooie. I remember being tasked to perform beat busts on every palm tree in Treasure Trove Cove, hoping it would trigger Shark Food Island to raise from the ocean. Yes, it got that crazy.
Yahoo!
Of course, nobody found anything, until somebody did. Game hackers Ice Mario and Subtrag would return in 2001 with a bounty of information. Most importantly was the discovery of some Sandcastle cheat codes inside the Banjo Kazooie game. In the second stage of Banjo Kazooie Treasure Trove Cove, a Sandcastle exists which is used as a puzzle in the main adventure of the game. By beak busting the tiles to spell out Banjo Kazooie, the player will be rewarded with a gold jiggy. However, this lettered sandcastle floor also doubles up as a cheat code activation screen. By spelling out cheat followed by some phrase, the player could unlock things such as infinite eggs or feathers. Subtrag and Ice Mario, after hard work scouring the game's memory with cheat devices, finally discovered 7 exciting codes which would unlock the Stop and Swap items in Banjo Kazooie. By spelling out the phrase cheat, now you can see a nice ice key which you can have for free. This would trigger a static cutscene which would reveal the ice key chamber now open. Likewise, spelling out the phrase cheat out of the sea rises to reveal more secret prizes will show a static cutscene of Shark Food Island standing proud above the ocean. A desert door opens wide, ancient secrets wait inside. Now the ancient door in Gobi's Valley is unlocked. Cheat, don't you go and tell her about the secret in her cellar. The previously locked wine barrel is now open. Cheat, amidst the haunted gloom, a secret in the bathroom. The mystery egg appears atop of Logo's toiletry system. Cheat, now Banjo will be able to see it on Nabnut's table. The egg appears on Nabnut's table. And the final code, cheat, this secret you'll be grabbing in the captain's cabin will trigger the red egg to appear on the captain's bed. Now, even Banjo fans without a GameShark device could gain access to the secret areas in Banjo Kazooie with the Sandcastle codes. The codes made their way into gaming magazines, and Rare kept tight-lipped about them. The codes took Ice Mario and Subtract approximately 2.5 years to discover. The codes were clearly not intended for public use at this time, and still appeared not to be the legitimate way to access the secrets due to the codes beginning with the word cheat. Many believe them to be debug codes. The Stop and Swap items were there for the taking, but still, we had no use for them. Now that everybody had access to the Banjo Kazooie secret areas via the Sandcastle codes, everybody turned to Banjo Tooie to find the possible Stop and Swap connection. Ice Mario and Subdrag came in clutch with new discoveries in Banjo Tooie. Banjo Tooie is a huge game. Combing the game's code was a large undertaking. Eventually, interesting information would be discovered in Banjo Tooie's memory. One of these findings was a base egg, an unused model of the full-size Stop and Swap eggs, taken straight from Banjo Kazooie. Here, I've included a post by Ice Mario discussing the base egg discovery. As you can see, the big yellow base egg present in the American version was removed from the PAL version, which was released about 6 months later. Rare had clearly tidied up unrequired game code from the PAL version. I remember reading this exact blog post in 2001 and being very disappointed and disheartened. Had the Stop and Swap feature really been dropped? What about Captain Blackeye and the pictures of the pink egg around him? What is going off? I'd like to take the opportunity during this segment to talk about some of Banjo Tooie's mysteries, which may or may not pertain to the Stop and Swap mystery. I wish to bring these to your attention for completionist's sake, because I still see misinformation and confusion regarding such topics. Around the time, some fans speculated that Stop and Swap had actually been cancelled as a form of punishment by Rare due to people hacking into the secret areas and collecting the secret items in Banjo Kazooie. A conspiracy theory that wasn't true. If Stop and Swop had been removed, however, it stands to reason that areas associated with it would also have been removed as well. What if remnants of a removed area existed in Banjo Tooie's game data, such as an area where the player would need to stand in order to retrieve the secret items once they had been sent over from Banjo Kazooie? A breakthrough was discovered using a GameShock device involving Banjo Tooie's fast travel method. It was discovered that 3 unused silo locations existed in the game's memory. A hacking device could replace the unused silo text in the game. No corresponding locations were ever found along with them, however, meaning they could not transport the player to the original intended area associated with them. There are 7 usable silos in the Finish game, with 1 unused silo called Silo 8, 1 called Silo 9. These, without doubt, are simply leftovers from the game. There is also text for an unused silo entitled Ridiculously Secret Area 1. From examining Banjo Tooie's gaming code, forum user BanjoPL concluded that the ridiculously secret area text was implemented late in the game's development. For years, speculation has been rife concerning the ridiculously secret area. However, we may potentially finally have an answer. Update time. Greg Mayles, one of the developers of Banjo Kazooie, recently in December 2025 answered a fan question regarding the area, and he believes that he was simply just having fun and that the area never actually existed. Another point of mystery in Banjo Tooie was Grunty's lair. Grunty's lair served as the main overworld in Banjo Kazooie. In the sequel, Banjo Tooie, the entrance can be accessed. However, it is soon apparent that other regions of the lair cannot be explored. This is due to boulders blocking off further entrances. Apart from a character called Cheeto and a torn portrait of Grunty with feathers in a nest to replenish the player's supply, there is nothing of use here. The ripped portrait in Banjo Tooie made people curious if there was also a secret behind it in the first game. However, investigating has proven that nothing exists behind it. While on the subject of Grunty's lair on the original game, many people suspected secrets hid behind the large doors of the transformation room on the top floor of the tower room. Again, extensive research finds nothing behind them. In Banjo Tooie, the mystery regarding the lair holds a bit more weight. Upon entering the lair, text at the bottom of the screen states that this is the entrance, with the implication being, with this distinction, that there are other different parts to the lair. Banjo Tooie's game code was analysed by Rare Witch project member Cool Boy Man. He discovered unused text for an area called Tower Room. This is the area that held the transformation room and the cauldron to the final boss fight. Obviously, there is no way to break the boulders inside the lair, and glitching through them shows that there is nothing behind them. Nothing but a black empty void. Interestingly, it appears the way to reach the tower room may have been from the outside. In Spiral Mountain, the tower can obviously be seen. By examining the tower in Banjo Tooie, it is clear one tower window has an opening moulded out which is not present in the model of the tower in the original game. The detail is detectable by wireframe. Additionally, an unfinished entity in the game's code is called Grunty Layer Exterior Tower Window. This was never used, and it is highly likely that this was intended to be a breakable window. Rare employees were questioned regarding the tower. Neither Steve or Greg Mayles had a solid answer to this question. Some fans were curious if the tower room ever linked to Stop N Swop. A popular theory being that the items once sent from Banjo Kazooie would arrive in the layer in Banjo Tooie. But who knows, even the game developers can't remember what the tower was about. I'd like to speak briefly about a mode called Bottle's Revenge. I won't dwell on this too much as I don't believe this was linked to the Stop N Swop narrative. Anyway, it was discovered by Ice Mario after a lot of work around 2004 that an additional multiplayer mode existed in the game's code. The first player would resume the role of Banjo in adventure mode. The second player played as Devil Bottles, and they would take control of nearby enemies to impede Banjo's progress. A lot of speculation concerning Bottle's Revenge's existence had floated around the internet for quite some time. Years, actually. People wondered if Bottle's Revenge was a feature planned to be unlocked by Stop N Swop eggs after being sent from Banjo Kazooie to Banjo Tooie. Greg Mayles went on to say that years later he wished Bottle's Revenge had been finished and made it into the final game, but they couldn't get it to work correctly, so it was scrapped. The mode manifested as counter-operative mode in Perfect Dark 64, where the second player resumes the role of the opponent to stop the first player from completing their mission. Greg says Bottle's Revenge was dropped because they couldn't get the boss battles to work correctly, and it would be easy for the second player to exploit boss animations, thus making it impossible for the first player to defeat the bosses. Interestingly enough, the version of Bottle's Revenge recovered from Banjo Tooie's game data runs pretty smoothly, and when entering a boss room, Devil Bottles simply vanishes during the boss fight. So it is still a bit of a mystery as to why it was left out of the final game. I was never a big believer that Bottle's Revenge was a Stop N Swop reward, however we have a small update here. Greg Mills was recently asked if Bottle's Revenge was going to be a Stop N Swop reward. He says that he wasn't sure, but Bottle's Revenge being unlocked that way would have been a suitably nice reward, although he honestly can't remember a lot about what was planned. The final Banjo Tooie mystery of any substance is that of the discovery of the text Glowbo cave in the game's memory, situated between the rest of the coding for CloudCuckoo land. The cave is named after the creature that the small ice key collected in Banjo Tooie unlocks, which is then used to transform Kazooie into Dragon Kazooie. A very likely area of a potentially unused cave exists in CloudCuckoo land on top of a purple cliff ledge, which leads to a strange purple wall with a fissure going down it. Nothing, including firing grenade eggs at it, can open it. Was this ever tied to the original Stop N Swop? Again, who knows, but this location holds an aura of mystery, as if something here is incomplete. Well, Update. Perhaps one of the biggest mini mysteries to be actually solved is the Glowbo cave. It turns out that originally, as described in conceptual art pertaining to CloudCuckoo Land's design, that the cave originally would have held a room where a fire would need to be lit in order to draw out a number of Glowbos to be used for Wumba's transformations and Mumbo's magic. The Glowbos would be used in CloudCuckoo Land and Cauldron Keep. Cauldron Keep was once a fully fleshed out level with 10 jiggies, until it was later cut, but originally there would be no Glowbos there, and so extra would be added to the CloudCuckoo Land Glowbo cave. This purple ledge with the fissure is the most likely location where the Glowbo cave once would have stood. And so, we finally have an answer to the Glowbo cave, and it's safe to say that it was never related to Stop and Swop. So, with all major Banjo Tooie mysteries covered, and an understanding that Stop and Swop between Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie was likely removed, though not confirmed, where do we go now? Well, the story is far from over. Before we get to the really juicy bits, let's look at some Stop and Swop references in other Rare games circa the early 2000s. Though not vital to the main story, I do think that it is worth mentioning still at least two of these references, due to the fact that they highlight the crazy twists and turns that Stop and Swop truth seekers had to deal with. In 2005, Rare released Banjo Pilot. On the Game Boy Advance, players would receive Cheeto pages throughout their time playing, and they could be exchanged for bonus rewards from Cheeto himself. If 999 pages were amassed, and the Rare time trials were beaten, Cheeto would offer to sell the player an option called Stop and Swop. Completing the requirements was no easy task, and those that managed to do so were told. So you want to know about Stop and Swop, eh? Why don't you stop annoying me and swap this game for a nice book or something? A huge anticlimax. The most interesting Stop and Swop reference that would whip the Banjo Kazooie community into a frenzy was in Rare's 2003 release, grabbed by the Ghoulies on the Xbox. The game had multiple references to Banjo Kazooie, but the most shocking was in Chapter 3. While exploring a classroom, players would discover a whiteboard with a homework assignment written on it. 1. Collect the ice key. 2. Collect the eggs. 3. Activate secret level. Along with those 3 tasks were scrolled images of 4 mystery eggs and the ice key, also 3 overhead maps with X's on them. Stop and Swop had not been confirmed or denied by Rare at this stage, so fans got to work to try and make sense of the situation. One major point was that in fact only 4 eggs appeared on the whiteboard and not 6. Did this mean that 2 eggs were fakes? Could having all 6 eggs with 2 being fake be a failsafe by Rare to void the rewards of Stop and Swop for players that had cheated to get the secrets in Banjo Kazooie prematurely? After all, the Tepid Seat did allude to this back in 1999. Different theories were thrown around. Only the blue, pink and the cyan egg were real because they were in actual hidden areas. Others speculated the cyan egg was a fake, and the X barrel indicated it wasn't supposed to be collected. Realistically, it was a joke by Rare. We all know in retrospect that there is absolutely no way Banjo Kazooie or Tooie could house space in the game's memory for a secret level. So far, I've tried to tell the story in a chronological order. However, with it spanning 25 years and multiple games, along with different years of various discoveries, it can result in jumping ahead in time. So now, to get to the good stuff, we jump back to 1999. The release of Donkey Kong 64. What are we doing back in 1999, and what are we doing hanging out with the Kongs? Well, while it was originally believed that Stop and Swop secrets were only intended to connect to Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie, upon its eventual release in 2000, it is now apparent that this is not the case. Leading up to Donkey Kong 64's release, Rare posted promotional images on their website to whet the appetite of gamers, and one of those images showed Donkey Kong in his treehouse with a fridge freezer in the corner, depicting Banjo and Kazooie's faces on the side of it. Upon the release of Donkey Kong 64, the freezer was nowhere to be seen, not even when completing the game to 101%. Well, after the release of Banjo Tooie, the hacker guys over at the Rare Witch Project once again got us covered. In 2003 it was discovered that the text Ice Key was hiding snug inside the Donkey Kong 64 game memory. Additionally, they found, by examining the sound modifier, the Stop and Swop fanfare music from Banjo Kazooie was present in Donkey Kong 64. I would like to point out that the Banjo Kazooie secret fanfare does feature in Donkey Kong 64 when the characters Trough and Scoff are fed enough bananas. And then they open the boss door. However, that is the Donkey Kong 64 version of the fanfare. However, this version of the fanfare from Banjo Kazooie also exists in Donkey Kong 64's memory. Note the different tempos in the Donkey Kong 64 version. It is possible that bringing the ice key from Banjo Kazooie and entering a certain area in Donkey Kong 64 would have awakened this ostentatious fanfare from Banjo Kazooie once again. As Subdrag pointed out, Rare seemed to cut corners with the reuse of the fanfare from Banjo Kazooie, albeit of a different tempo for Trough and Scoff. Regardless, the original version of the fanfare from Banjo Kazooie being in Donkey Kong 64 had to be there for the intention of the Stop and Swop process. But was there any merit to this? The answer is absolutely yes. Though it would take until 2008 until anything could be done with the ice key text in Donkey Kong 64. Rune Hero 123 of the Rare Witch Project forums revealed his ice key discovery on the 23rd of July 2008. I'll keep things simple for the sake of the flow of the video, but basically Rune Hero 123 had discovered via hacking that you could activate the collection of the ice key in Donkey Kong 64. However, the ice key would simply appear in the player's inventory as a 1 out of 1 collectible. No accompanying image of the ice key was present or ever been found. It was most likely removed from the game's data before release. So basically, through hacking you could have the ice key collected in Donkey Kong 64. However, there was no graphical image to represent the fact that you had it collected in your inventory. For those interested in the specifics of our Rune Hero 123 discovered the ice key text and everything along with it, you can check out the thread on the Weirwitch Project forums. So, could there be more remnants of Stop and Swop in Donkey Kong 64? Well, nothing points to the eggs being transferred to Donkey Kong 64 from Banjo Kazooie. There is, however, more to the story involving the ice key. A glitch in Donkey Kong 64 would trigger a strange unused cutscene in Donkey Kong's treehouse. It was discovered that in the cutscene, the camera would pan across to an empty area where the Banjo Kazooie freezer once stood. It would then warp the player to a seemingly uninteresting wall in an ice chamber located in crystal caves. This ice chamber is a part of natural gameplay, and it is relatively, well, actually downright unremarkable. There isn't much to do here other than collect some bananas for Donkey Kong and Chunky's Gorilla Gum Pad that spawns a golden banana, a common item in the game. Additionally, the camera would pan awkwardly and position itself to face a barren wall. Now, what does this remind me of? Well, remember the purple ledge in CloudCuckoo Land in Banjo Tooie? That feels unfinished and unused? Well, that is the same feeling that this area gives off. And I'm not suggesting the two areas are linked in any way, simply that both stand out as unremarkable. But what if I told you that we knew for a fact there used to be a lot more here? Okay everyone, I'm going to say it out loud. Stop and Swop was a dropped feature. While Banjo Kazooie fans were still going on Stop and Swop hunts in 2000 and 2001. However, the story is far from over. Due to the removal of the Stop and Swop feature so late into Donkey Kong's production, some European guides for Donkey Kong existed depicting the original map layout for Crystal Caves. In the North Room, which we looked at a moment ago, a small chamber can be seen attached behind a large door. With this, we can assume that originally players would smash the ice to the chamber as usual, then enter the North Room, which held a large ice door instead of the now empty wall. Note the camera dragged into a pan back to focus on something of importance, which is no longer there. Along with the ice key text, it makes logical sense that the ice key would be sent from Banjo Kazooie to Donkey Kong 64 to open the chamber in Crystal Caves. We have a big icy locked door in Donkey Kong 64 and a giant ice key in Banjo Kazooie, so this is a representation of what would have happened. Approaching the ice door, the player may potentially have pulled or pushed a switch nearby, resulting in a cut-cam cutscene showing Woz's cave with the ice wall shattering open. The N64 would begin writing a payload of data to the N64's memory with the value 0x10E. The player, having seen something in Banjo Kazooie, would then turn Donkey Kong 64 off, then place in the Banjo Kazooie cartridge and turn the N64 back on. Upon startup, Banjo Kazooie would scan the memory of the N64 and discover the value 0x1 0E, which instructs it to open the area in Waz's cave. The player would go to Frizzy Peak and grab the ice key. Upon collecting the sought after item, Banjo and Kazooie would begin writing the payload data to the Nintendo 64's memory with the value 0x106. Now we turn off the console and switch back to Donkey Kong 64, where upon startup the ice key will now have been transferred to the inventory of Donkey Kong 64. For nearly 2 decades, what would happen next exactly remained a mystery, but with new information in December 2025, I can now reveal what would actually happen next. It appears that the ice key may automatically be attributed to the player's inventory, and then the ice key would be taken to Crystal Caves, to the northern room with the big icy door as exemplified earlier. With the new information, we now know that the ice key at this point, after opening the door, would transport itself back to the freezer in Donkey Kong's hut, where it would remain until needed for a further use. As for what was behind the ice door, we can make a very accurate guess based on 2 pieces of evidence. The most likely item intended to be sealed beyond the ice key door in Crystal Caves is the giant golden rare banana, which grants 101%. This is concluded from 2 pieces of evidence, one being Nintendo's response to Rare during correspondence concerning Stop N Swop's functions, where Nintendo expressed concern about the feature and suggested some other way to unlock the special bonus ending, implying the outtake ending was once a Stop N Swop bonus. The second piece of evidence from 2025 we will explore later in order to retain narrative flow. Here is a representation of how Stop N Swop would have gone, most likely in regards to Banjo Kazooie, Donkey Kong 64 and Banjo Tooie had the process gone as planned. Rare alluded to Blackeye having his own mission in Banjo Tooie, so most likely talking to him would have resulted in a cut camera showing Shark Food Island rising out of the ocean in Treasure Trove Cove. Like explained with the ice key in Donkey Kong 64, previous data would be stored temporarily on the N64. The player swaps to Banjo Kazooie, goes to grab the egg, then turns off the N64 and replaces Banjo Tooie. The pink egg would be transferred to Banjo Tooie. As for the ice key in Donkey Kong 64, we obviously just discussed that. For reference sake, going forward we are going to call this the OG Stop N Swop. Remember that this is the dropped Stop N Swop feature that included at the very least these 3 games. So we are over an hour into the deep dive, and they've only just touched upon the technical aspects of Stop N Swop, and I still have not gone into immense technical detail. Well, 2 reasons. I do not want to disrupt the narrative flow of the video, and second, I don't wish to overburden less tech savvy people with too much tech speak. We will, however, look a bit more in depth to the process a bit later in the next chapter, and I will provide links to Rare employees discussing Stop N Swop's full technicalities so you can fully flesh out your knowledge on the topic. Before we move on to the next chapter, I want to raise some more information about the ice door chamber in Donkey Kong 64. There is a known fact that the room has a bunch of deactivated enemy spawns. Some have speculated that these enemies were intended to guard the ice door, but I disagree. I believe in an earlier build, as exemplified by the kiosk build of Donkey Kong 64, that originally Chunky Kong would enter the room, Be locked in and have to defeat a bunch of Kremlins for a golden banana at some point, it was decided the ice key would be added into this room. Having a bunch of enemies spawning in front of the door would detract from the moral and experience of discovering the ice key door, so to be less intrusive the enemy challenge was scrapped, and so the Gorilla Gone pad was added and the golden banana could be collected in a much less distracting way while giving the ice key door the attention that it deserved. However, since Stop and Swap was removed from the game so late into development, Rare simply removed the door and left the Gorilla Gone pad there as an activity to acquire the golden banana, and never reinstated the enemy horde challenge for Chunky. Just something I wanted to point out concerning the unactivated enemy spawners in this area. Also, that the kiosk version has showed no signs of Stop and Swap related remnants in general. The clip that you are watching is a ROM hack of the Donkey Kong 64 kiosk version, which has the final version of Donkey Kong 64's geometry transplanted into it so that it's kind of playable. This is courtesy of Look at the Window on YouTube. In 1999, Rare found that Tim Stamper and Banjo Kazooie programmer Paul Makachek filed patent US 6820265B1. System method and data storage medium for sharing data between video games, also known as Stop and Swap. I promise I memorised all of that and I did not read that from a notebook. Anyway, the patent would be published online on November the 16th, 2004. Banjo Kazooie and Stop and Swap fanatics could now read the proposed idea behind the feature and what it entailed. It is a lengthy technical read, but I will go over the interesting parts in a simplified fashion. If you wish to read the document yourself, I've provided the URL here. The reason behind the feature being called Stop and Swap is apparent from the get-go. The patent would detail the intention of transfer of the mystery exit and the ice key via cold swapping and hot swapping. Cold swapping meaning the console is switched off when the game packs are switched, and hot swapping meaning the console remains on during the switching of the game packs. Ultimately, hot swapping was not used as confirmed by Paul Makachek, and cold swapping was the intention. Oh, and to those whom it may concern, a quick side note, can we stop saying that they spelt swap wrong? Swap is a valid variation of the spelling. Anyway, if code swapping was done correctly, the memory from the first game cartridge would temporarily remain in the N64's memory for approximately 23 seconds. Paul would later confirm this. Data basically being transferred without a direct source of power. It's almost ironic really that the ice key is being transferred via a method called cold swapping. The patent also brings up the hypothetical scenario of a huge blocked icy cave with a keyhole inside of it on one game and a giant ice key in another game, obviously referring to the long lost ice door in Donkey Kong 64 and the ice key in Banjo Kazooie. The patent goes on to mention pulling a lever in the ice chamber which would send information or a flag to signal what had happened to the N64's memory. Then Switching off the N64 and swapping to Banjo Kazooie, you can grab the now accessible ice key. I don't need to repeat what we do with the ice key. The patent was drafted during the development window for Banjo Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64, so ultimately it all adds up that this hypothetical ice door and ice key scenario made its way into these games. I will touch on points made in this interview with Paul later, but if you wish to delve deeper into the computer science to learn of the beginnings of Stop and Swap in more detail, then please check out the great interview on the website I provide. But please make sure that you come back, because we have a lot more to discuss. And also we will see now Nintendo's response in regards to the whole Stop and Swap affair. Lead engineer Paul Makachek provided us with the facts that he received from Nintendo tech support that documents the cancelling of Stop and Swap. While Stop and Swap is fully working in Banjo Kazooie, Nintendo's Director of Technical Support raised issues with the feature during late development of Donkey Kong 64 in October 1999. Issues were cited as potentially damaging game packs during the swapping process, and also variations of N64 hardware which may have made the feature unreliable in regards to sending the data. It also said that newer models of the N64 would struggle to retain the memory once switched off due to revised hardware. And it turned out that yes, the Sandcastle codes in Banjo Kazooie were a contingency plan. Nintendo suggested to use passcodes to access Banjo Kazooie's secret items or areas. Then, in the new game, in this example Donkey Kong 64, have the player answer a quiz pertaining to the secret area that they had just discovered in Banjo Kazooie. A nice suggestion, but it wouldn't really create the magic Rare I'd envisioned, so Stop and Swap was stopped and dropped.
Huh?
I'll keep that in, I think it was funny. Due to Stop and Swap being dropped in 1999, no rewards were really envisioned or implemented for Banjo Tooie. However, Stop and Swap was cancelled at the 11th hour concerning Donkey Kong 64's production. Stop and Swap was fully implemented in Donkey Kong 64 and ready to go. Rare had to quickly nix and remove Stop and Swap related features and areas in Donkey Kong 64, hence why some hints of its existence still exist. In the stage Creepy Castle exists a museum. Within the museum, the 8th known Stop and Swap item once existed, until the game was close to be placed into production for public release. In a room shielded by a pane of glass, an unusually unique stone pillar stands alone in the dark with a simple lamp swinging overhead. Almost like it is shining a light of importance onto something, but the pillar is empty. In the finished game, you can enter the room via Tiny's monkey port pad and collect a few bananas. Other than that, the room is strangely empty and hardly seems like it would be worth creating just for that. Maybe we could come back here later in the game and something would happen, except again, nothing ever did happen. So what evidence leads to the conclusion that this is a Stop and Swap related room? Well, on Rare's website, a couple of fans did ask Uncle Tusk what was the point of this room and the podium, and Uncle Tusk replied with the simple fact that things fluctuate during production and the stand lost its purpose. So, remember how the German Donkey Kong 64 guide still had an old map printed in it? Well, this applies to this room too. On top of the now empty pillar rests a big golden statue of Donkey Kong. English guides have the statue removed. Paul Makachek practically confirmed that this was the 8th Stop and Swap item in his interview with the Retro Hour podcast. He mentioned that the item had to be removed after Nintendo cancelled the Stop and Swap feature. Much like the ice key situation in Donkey Kong 64, all they could do was remove and disable the minimum amount of stuff related to Stop and Swap. Well, the mystery of the Donkey Kong bust has finally been solved thanks to Greg Mills's 2025 December information drop. The statue, as predicted, would remain out of reach like the ice key until an undecided activity in Banjo Tooie would have been triggered. A small cutscene would then have played showing the glass case in Creepy Castle shatter. The player would swap from Banjo Tooie and head over to Creepy Castle in Donkey Kong 64. Upon collection of the statue, the player would switch back to Banjo Tooie, where Bottles would inform the player to check the multiplayer menu. Here, it would be revealed that the transfer of the Donkey Kong statue from DK64 to Banjo Tooie had unlocked Donkey Kong and other potential Donkey Kong characters to play as in Banjo Tooie's multiplayer mode. This is one of the cases where we actually know without a doubt what the actual reward for performing Stop and Swap would have been. Which is ironic because this is one of the last Stop and Swap items that we were ever aware about. So, I did consider cutting this portion out of the video. However, I briefly want to discuss the Mermaid Room mystery in Donkey Kong 64. Due to wanting to be thorough with detailing the twists and turns and curiosities that Stop and Swap truth seekers faced on this long journey. Before I say anything, do you notice anything about this clip? I mean, anything unusual or odd? But there is an odd location in Donkey Kong 64 that I want to explore briefly. Upon entering the Mermaid's Palace of Gloomy Galleon, a cutscene cinematically focuses on an empty portal on the left hand side of the throne room before panning to show the mermaid sobbing. The game wants you to notice this empty glass portal. But what is the point of this one glass covered alcove? You can actually explore the room online with a 3D model viewer, and it totally looks like a showcase window beside the throne for something prestigious to sit in. And this is what the back of the alcove looks like. If there was an alcove on either side of the throne, I could give this a pass, but the fact that there's just one on the left, it's so asymmetrical and strange. This must have housed something at some point. So, I do have an update regarding this Mermaid Mystery, kind of. It's an ironic case where a lack of evidence within new evidence regarding the Donkey Kong connectivity to Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie that actually gives us a potential conclusion to this mystery. The conclusion being that potentially this had no correlation to Stop and Swap. I will go into detail about this later on when we go over the newly released blueprints for Stop and Swap concerning Donkey Kong and Banjo Tooie, but I'm willing to keep my foot in the door and keep the door slightly open to the possibility that there could have been something here, but I'm not quite so certain. It may just simply have been something in normal gameplay that was shuffled around and lost its purpose. But having said that, it does give you unfinished vibes along the lines of the podium in the statue room. That cannot be denied. But as I say, we'll talk about this again a little bit more later. While initially believed Stop and Swop would only involve Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie, with Donkey Kong 64 later revealed to be a part of the lineup, it was later confirmed that Stop and Swop was to encompass many Rare titles. In the 3 months following Banjo Kazooie's release on June the 29th, 1998, these are the following games that would have been in development at Rare: Banjo Tooie, Donkey Kong 64, Jet Force Gemini, Conker 12 Tails, Dinosaur Planet, and Perfect Dark. There were 7 mystery eggs originally, but one became an ice key specifically for Donkey Kong 64. Paul also confirmed on the Retro Hour podcast recently that if they had time and more planning, perhaps one of the mystery eggs would have been made to resemble a gun to be sent to Perfect Dark 64. Since the teams weren't sure which mystery items would be sent to which games, they opted to create the mystery items to just resemble mystery Easter eggs. So, while certain games were hoped to connect to the Stop and Swap connection, let's take a look at the actual fate of each game that Rare hoped that Stop and Swap could potentially have connected to, which was potentially the next 6 upcoming games based upon the fact that there were 6 mystery eggs. We already know that Donkey Kong was intended to have Stop and Swap included and it was ready to go. But then Nintendo nixed it at the 11th hour. As for Banjo Tooie, we know that Stop and Swap was removed in the end, but it's very probable in the early stages of development ideas regarding Stop and Swap were being incorporated, hence Captain Blackeye and his Tavern of Mysteries. Jet Force Gemini was released just before Donkey Kong 64. And Donkey Kong 64 was the second known game to include Stop and Swap as a feature, therefore it seems very likely that Jet Force Gemini team at Rare were not included on the plan of Stop and Swap, or had not been reached out to before finishing the game, and so Stop and Swap was never a part of Jet Force Gemini. The Jet Force Gemini team did eventually go on to make Mickey's Speedway USA, so it's very possible that Stop and Swap could have been integrated into this game had Stop and Swap gone ahead. Of course, next up is Conker 12 Tails, which was actually completely gutted and started the game from the ground up, and it became Conker's Bad Fur Day, and as a result of this there's absolutely no connection to Stop and Swap in Conker's Bad Fur Day. But it is possible that in the early version of 12 Tails, there could have been some kind of vague connectivity, or plans at the very least. Next up is Dinosaur Planet, one of the last few games that Rare worked on the Nintendo 64, and of course, the game eventually evolved into Star Fox Adventures on the Nintendo GameCube. A ROM of Dinosaur Planet did leak, and from what I understand there are absolutely no references of any kind or indication to Stop and Swap. So that goes without saying as well that Star Fox Adventures also has none either, with it being on a completely different console. Which begs the question, even if Stop and Swap did go to plan, it was actually getting close to the end of the Nintendo 64's life cycle, so some of these games would never really have been able to Stop and Swap with Banjo Kazooie. The whole Stop and Swap process could have been cut short, but not quite as short as it actually was. So the final game to touch on is Perfect Dark 64, and I want to touch on this a little bit more than the others, mainly from comments I've seen online regarding Stop and Swap, which I wish to address. Perfect Dark 64 is packed with its own mysteries, the Punk Pond, the Chicago Ghost, and the now solved Cheese Mystery as well. Perfect Dark mysteries I want to quickly touch on involve a keyhole and a question mark. So you can see where I'm going with this. In the multiplayer map Warehouse, on the top floor, in some ventilation shafts, is a grill with a question mark on it. Above the question mark grill, there is an ammo pack that is unobtainable. There is also ammo crates in another multiplayer stage, the sewer, and these crates can also not be obtained. Also, the ones in the sewers are clearly props to make the sewers look like they're littered with junk. However, the question mark grill ammo pack, to my understanding, is tagged to fall in the game's memory should the grill have been opened up. I can't confirm that, it's just what I've heard. If you know anything about that, please comment below. Also, on an old Rare website, on the Uncle Tusk section, when quizzed about the question mark grill, it was stated that it was put there just for fun, due to other technicalities of the level, such as it only having 5 gun spawns, when all the other multiplayer stages have 6. I do believe that there was probably more to it at some stage. Maybe some exclusive Perfect Dark secret. There could have been a secret gun up there or something to be discovered. Additionally, in Area 51, there is a small ventilation shaft that exists with a strange keyhole in it. Normally, the player cannot view or reach the keyhole, and it is easy to assume a connection to Stop N SWOP due to the symbols of a question mark and the keyhole. However, I did ask if any work towards Banjo Kazooie connecting to Perfect Dark had been done, and according to his recollection, he said he doesn't believe any discussion with the Perfect Dark team ever took place regarding Stop N SWOP. So the question mark and the keyhole may just be a coincidence. So we'll put this down to no Stop N SWOP links. I felt like I needed to discuss this. Now I will present a hypothetical demonstration of what Stop N SWOP on the Nintendo 64 could have looked like if it had panned out. For the sake of keeping things simple, I will pretend that Jet Force Gemini, Conker's Bad Fur Day and Dinosaur Planet were part of the Stop N SWOP equation. First, you would play Banjo Kazooie, and obviously once completed you'd move on to another game, Donkey Kong 64. You would then activate the Ice Key Chamber back in Banjo Kazooie as I discussed in Chapter 9. You would get the Ice Key from Banjo Kazooie and send it to Donkey Kong 64. You would use the Ice Key in Donkey Kong 64 and open up the ice door to get yourself a reward to use in the game. Now we know that there's an ice chest in Banjo Tooie, so we would then send the Ice Key from Donkey Kong 64 to Banjo Tooie, where we can open the chest up to get another reward. Then you could be playing Jet Force Gemini and come across a frozen ice cave on the planet of Cerulean, and then the Ice Key would be sent from Banjo Tooie to Jet Force Gemini to unlock a reward there. From then on, the Ice Key would pass around from game to game, unlocking various secret areas, where maybe the Ice Key's final resting place would have been somewhere in Area 51, where the cryogenic chambers are, in Perfect Dark 64. Concerning the 6 mystery eggs, based upon information given by various Banjo developers, the belief and assumption was that the mystery eggs would each be sent to other Rare games. 6 eggs, 6 games. There were still holes in the understanding of how this would pan out, due to information being a little vague, as Rare employees themselves admit their memory on the subject was hazy. Even though we knew about the Ice Key and that it was destined for Donkey Kong 64, at the very least, due to the remnants of it being in the game, There was no sign of any mystery eggs being swapped to Donkey Kong 64. Still, the assumption was that the eggs would be sent to each subsequent rare title. Well, with the blueprints of Stop and Swap concerning Banjo Tooie being released in December 2025, we now know where the eggs were to be sent, and it appears to be somewhat different to what we previously believed. These finer details will be explored in a later chapter in order to keep things tidy. You thought that jumping around in time was over? Well, in 2008, 8 years after Banjo Tooie was released, Rare released Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Players that pre-ordered got access to a fully realised version of the original N64 Banjo Kazooie game with improved graphics, a leaderboard and achievements. The restored functionality of Stop and Swap was promised. The Ice Key and the 6 mystery eggs would be transferred to Nuts and Bolts. I wasn't nuts about this idea. Oh. To cut a long story short, when the items were sent from Banjo Kazooie to Nuts and Bolts, they basically unlocked special vehicle parts. With the release of Log's Special Challenges, a DLC for Nuts and Bolts, the special items unlocked special blueprints for the vehicles. 2 weeks after the DLC, Banjo Tooie was also released on the Xbox, and so Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie could finally connect in the modern era. Code swapping was no longer part of the process. Simply having Banjo Kazooie save data on the console with the secrets unlocked and turning on Banjo Tooie on the Xbox Live Arcade would unlock the feature. The file select portraits would have the Stop and Swap logo on them. The feature is ready. The player begins Banjo Tooie with all 6 mystery eggs and the Ice Key. The Ice Key is still used to ultimately unlock Dragon Kazooie. Heggy will once again hatch the eggs, providing the homing eggs, Regal Bash and Jinjo in multiplayer. The yellow egg, once hatched, unlocks an Xbox profile gamer pick. The red egg unlocks a Banjo Tooie Xbox dashboard theme. And the grand prize for the cyan egg is... You read it correctly, Stop and Swap 2 is unlocked on the Xbox Live Arcade version of Tooie after hatching the cyan egg. This likely will be a short chapter 2, but I do need to touch on this. I will also provide my opinion on the Xbox version of Stop and Swap also. Anyway, hatching the cyan egg results in a pseudo notification popping up, much like a PlayStation trophy or an Xbox achievement. This would add a text reward of "Oh no, not again" on the Stop and Swap 2 menu. Performing certain in-game actions resulted in additional text rewards being added to the list. For example, Karma Camellia, which is awarded to the player for transforming into every Wumba transformation. Think of the text list to be like the 6 mystery eggs and the Ice Key in the Stop and Swap menu, except in a list form. Other tasks included beating the bosses in replay mode within 15 minutes, as well as a few others. The last 3 rewards required finding the Banjo Kazooie game packs which house the pink and blue egg as well as the small Ice Key in the original Nintendo 64 game Banjo Tooie. In the Xbox Live Arcade version of Banjo Tooie, the Banjo Kazooie game packs now contained the bronze egg, the silver egg, and the gold egg. So far, no other game has connected to Banjo Tooie Xbox Live Arcade in order to transfer or use these rewards or secrets. I feel like this is just a parody a joke on the original Stop and Swap situation, and that these rewards were never really meant to be used. But if there ever is a new Banjo Kazooie game, then maybe they will incorporate these rewards. Though I must admit, I have no real interest if anything happens or not with the Stop and Swap 2 menu. The reward list doesn't have the same excitement as the mystery eggs and the ice key in Banjo Kazooie. What made the OG Stop and Swap items so exciting and mysterious was the secret areas that they were discovered in, and the fanfare, and the Stop and Swap musical score that lingered with you after you had plundered the items. It was a grand mystery. This place is easily one of my favourite areas in Banjo Kazooie. The cacophony of the fanfare, and then the peace that settles, and the wavering, high-pitched instrumentation, the setting of the tomb, and not knowing where this secret was intended to go. What we needed to do in some other game to gain access to this secret tomb. Just a much more magical feeling than the Stop and Swap 2 list. Now, I'd like to quickly go over the different versions of Stop and Swap that have existed over the years on the Nintendo 64 and the Xbox. First, we have the OG Stop and Swap of the Nintendo 64 era, the intended link of Banjo Kazooie to Donkey Kong 64 and Banjo Tooie, and potential other Nintendo 64 rare titles using the cold swap method. Due to Stop and Swap being dropped on the N64, Banjo Tooie was released with compensatory eggs and ice key, basically items programmed into the game that the players collected and used without any swapping of carts necessary. Then on the Xbox, we have the Xbox Live Arcade homage Stop and Swap, which links Xbox Live Arcade versions of Banjo Kazooie to Nuts and Bolts and the Xbox Live Arcade version of Banjo Tooie. And hatching the sign egg in Tooie Xbox Live Arcade results in the Stop and Swap 2 menu, currently unusable, possibly just a parody menu with no intention of real use. Anyway, I wanted to briefly cover the homage Stop and Swap of Xbox Live Arcade, since I've seen people claim that what the rewards would have been has now been solved, as you can do it on the Xbox version. But the point I wanted to make was that the rewards we received on the Xbox clearly were not what was intended on the N64, exemplified by unlocking an Xbox avatar and an Xbox dashboard theme. Anyway, moving on. On the 20th of July 2023, Scowo uploaded a video of himself doing something quite astonishing. He uploaded a video of himself performing Stop and Swap on the N64 console itself, something no one ever thought that they would see. In fact, Banjo Kazooie developer Paul Makachek commented on the video that this was the first time that it had been seen working outside of Twycross. Paul also highlighted that the method should have entailed cold swapping and not hot swapping like on the video. In the video, to my understanding, Scowo uses a modified Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time ROM to deposit a payload of data into the N64. Specific code Banjo Kazooie has been programmed to search for upon booting up, which will unlock Shark Food Island. Scowo quickly switches carts and returns to Banjo Kazooie to Treasure Trove Cove, and Shark Food Island is now raised, proving Stop and Swap fully worked as intended, only stopped by Nintendo for cautionary reasons. To clarify, Ocarina of Time was never part of the Stop and Swap process. It was simply a placeholder by Scowo in this experiment. Paul left a number of other comments on Scawo's video. I compiled the interesting ones into my previous version of this documentary, so you can head to that one if you want to look over some of them. Ultimately, they do reiterate things that I've mentioned in this video and will continue to mention later, so I've not included them in this version. Anyway, I asked him why Mad Monster Mansion had 2 Stop and Swap items in it, while some stages either had 1 or none, to which he did reply, and he said that the most likely reason was because Stop and Swap was added so late into development, they didn't get the chance to thoroughly think about where all of the secret areas could be for the items, hence why Mad Monster Mansion ended up getting 2. Before looking over the blueprints of 2025 that were released, let's visit an age-old question.
Why didn't Railway use a memory pack for Stop and Swap? Why didn't Railway use a memory pack for Stop and Swap? Why didn't Railway use a memory pack for Stop and Swap?
This is a question I often still see, even in response to my Stop and Swap 2-hour lore documentary that I posted recently. In fact, I even see people saying, why didn't Railway use an expansion pack too? Which would never happen, because that hardware is not for saving game data to. Well, here is the reason why they didn't. In 1998, before Banjo Kazooie was released, Railway's co-founder, Tim Stamper, questioned game engineer Paul Makachek as to if it would be possible to transfer data from one game to another on the Nintendo 64 without external hardware. Did you spot the important part of that inquiry? Without external hardware. That was the whole concept that spurred the existence of Stop and Swap to begin with. Paul, doing his experimenting, discovers that when the game is removed from the N64, retrievable data is kept inside the console for a brief time, roughly 25 seconds. Paul informs Tim, and the concept of mystery items in locked off locations in Banjo Kazooie is put into place. Remember, Stop and Swap in Banjo Kazooie is actually a fully functioning feature. It does work. The only problem is, no future Rare games held any code to talk to Banjo Kazooie's code in order to activate and open up the areas. From Banjo Kazooie's corner, Stop and Swap is fully functioning. Railway did, however, add a contingency plan in place in case problems with Stop and Swap did arise between games. This took form in shape of the Sandcastle cheat codes which unlocked the secret Stop and Swap items. As Paul Makachek pointed out, a memory pack would have been a contingency plan to a contingency plan, the Sandcastle codes. And so, realistically, knowing that code swapping worked, they didn't need to add the programming required for the means of a memory pack to be involved. Kieran Connell, a software engineer for Railway at the time, also stated in a now deleted tweet that there wasn't much room on the cart to be adding features such as memory pack compatibility. The problem of Stop and Swap failing only arose in 1999 due to Nintendo's hesitancy and asking Rare to pull the plug on the feature. Here is a tweet from Paul himself summarising the main point. Memory packs were not a part of the briefing. The whole notion of Stop and Swap was based upon being innovative and creating a sense of magic and mystery by transferring data between games without external hardware. And without the permission to perform Stop and Swap as Railway had planned, Stop and Swap's days came to an end. The ship had sailed.
Wahey!
As Paul has mentioned in a couple of interviews, Everyone has seen data transferred between hardware via memory packs and in this day and age USB devices and SD cards. But to see two carts with no additional hardware other than the N64, swap coding to allow special areas to open up and ultimately secret items to be sent from one game to the other would be akin to magic in the late 90s. And now, time to enter the final chapter. Let's go and investigate the Banjo Tooie Code Swap, aka Stop and Swap blueprints from 1999, finally unveiled in 2025. On December the 22nd, 2025, Greg Mails released online 2 pages detailing how Stop and Swap was to connect Banjo Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64 in relation to Banjo Tooie. As a result, models and graphics from Banjo Kazooie and DK64 would need to be recreated and implemented into Banjo Tooie. From Banjo Kazooie, they would need graphics and models such as a recreation of the scene showing Shark Food Island rising up out of the ocean in Treasure Trove Cove, a recreation of the scene showing the tomb door opening in Gobi's Valley, a recreation of the scene showing the secret egg appearing in Mad Monster Mansion's bathroom on top of Logo, a recreation of the scene showing the blocked up barrel clearing in Mad Monster Mansion's cellar, a recreation of the scene showing the secret egg appearing on the captain's bed in Rusty Bucket Bay, and a recreation of the scene showing the secret egg appearing on Nabnut's table in Click Clock Wood. Also, they would require the 3 different coloured secret eggs as seen in scenes 3, 5 and 6, which is the green egg, the yellow egg and the red egg. Regarding Donkey Kong 64, they would require a recreation of the scene showing the fridge freezer that contains the ice key opening in Donkey Kong's house, as well as a recreation of the scene showing the glass case that contains the golden Donkey Kong bus shattering in Creepy Castle, as well as models of the ice key and the gold Donkey Kong bust. The next portion breaks down the aspect of the mystery eggs and their transfer to Banjo Tooie. Let's go through this step by step. The next portion breaks down the aspect of the mystery eggs and their transfer to Banjo Tooie. First, the player must find and activate any of the 6 secret switches hidden on Spiral Mountain in Banjo Tooie. Upon doing so, a recreated Banjo Tooie cutscene shows the relevant egg appearing or an event happening to allow access to one of the eggs in Banjo Kazooie. Before we move on, let's discuss this. So finally, new information given to us answers, to an extent, some of the questions that we had. We now know that Spiral Mountain in Banjo Tooie would have had up to 6 secret switches that would trigger a cut cam of a recreated scene from Banjo Kazooie within Banjo Tooie and show either an egg appearing or an event. I assume by event it means Shark Food Island rising from the ocean, the X barrel opening, the Gobi desert door opening. So here I will add my speculation that the secret switches in Spiral Mountain would have required you some kind of prerequisite to have them appear or access, such as in the finished Tooie game we needed the grenade eggs to blast open the grill in the cliffside of Spiral Mountain in order to reach the little cave with the Banjo Kazooie pack inside. Perhaps originally a secret switch would have been hidden in here. The same goes for the waterfall with the cave inside where the grib grab ability was needed to get to the blue egg. Perhaps a switch would have been hidden in here as well. Other locations I ponder include the tower window of Grunty's lair. It's possible the switch or the switches to the Mad Monster Mansion mystery eggs could have been in the tower room. Of course, we examined the tower room in an earlier chapter. Perhaps since the 6 switches were not needed in the final game, with Stop and Swap being dropped, this location was also completely dropped. And this brings us to Blackeye with his pictures of Shark Food Island and the pink egg. Ray alluded that he had his own mission and purpose, strangely, which was non-existent in the finished game, so it appears more than ever to me that maybe talking to a drunken Captain Blackeye, he would either have let slip details on a hidden switch that would spawn in Spiral Mountain, then giving you access to Shark Food Island, or perhaps he would directly ask you to go to Shark Food Island for him because he was so drunk, and the switch would appear in Spiral Mountain as a result of speaking to him. I highly doubt that all 6 of these switches would have just been there for the taking from the start of the game, as it would have been, well, they're indicated as being secret, so they wouldn't just be there to be found straight away. I did actually question Greg Mayles on this idea, and he simply responded with saying it was possible, but he really can't remember. Once the sequence is finished, Bottles will explain how the cold swap works. It will repeat the message if you return to any of the moles near the switches and you speak to him. The player must then switch off Banjo Tooie and plug in Banjo Kazooie within the allowed time limit. The player then plays Banjo Kazooie and collects the secret egg. The player then switches off Banjo Kazooie and plugs in Banjo Tooie within the allowed time limit. If the process is done successfully, when the game restarts, Bottles will tell Donkey Kong. Now I assume this DK part here is an error. I assume they mean Banjo, not Donkey Kong. Yeah, I think that's a typo, honestly. To look into his pause screen and view the totals, the game brings up the desired information automatically where the secret egg will have been added to the Stop and Swap screen. So there's nothing there that we didn't really already know. Once you do something in Banjo Tooie and the event happens and it shows you the cutscene, you're then informed by Bottles to turn off your console, switch to the next game within so many seconds, get the item, the egg from Banjo Kazooie, whichever one that you've just unlocked, and then turn off Banjo Kazooie and bring it back to Tooie, and then the item will appear on a Stop and Swap screen on Banjo Tooie. Let's continue. So, once any game slot on Banjo Tooie has collected any secret egg, Egg 1 for example, from Banjo Kazooie and has successfully transferred it back to Banjo Tooie, all the game slots on Banjo Tooie will now have Egg 1, as this is a cartridge to cartridge feature, not a slot to slot one, unfortunately. However, to prevent the other 2 game slots players getting Egg 1 without doing any work, we will make it so that they have to follow the same switch hitting process before they get their reward. When either of the other game slot players do this, Egg 1 will simply be added to the Stop and Swap screen as before. So this basically tells us, much like Banjo Kazooie, where if one player gets a secret egg or the ice key, then all the save slots in Banjo Kazooie get them as well, due to the way that the technicalities work with Stop and Swap and the game data. So in order to prevent all the save slots in Banjo Tooie receiving the secrets, even though they've not done any work to get them, so they didn't have to go back to Banjo Kazooie to transfer the items over to Tooie, they're going to ensure, or they were going to ensure, that the players had to do the events relating to the secret switches before the eggs would appear in the stop and swap screens on the save file, or that they would be able to use them at the very least in their save file. So that's an interesting aspect actually, and kind of furthers the point to me that there would probably be some kind of quest or activity or something that would need to be done first in order to make those switches either appear or usable or accessible. Using Captain Blackeye as an example again, maybe the person in slot 2 would have had to have gone to speak to Captain Blackeye, make him spawn the switch, and then they would have to pull the switch, and then that would give them access to the pink egg that had already been transferred over to the slot 1 player in Banjo Tooie. And finally, concerning the mystery eggs, when the player now enters Eggy's egg shed, Banjo will automatically throw the secret egg onto its predetermined nest, where it can be hatched to reveal the special feature inside. So that's kind of like how it works in the finished game when you take the stop and swap items that you find in Banjo Tooie and you throw them into Eggy's nests and she hatches them for you. It's interesting to know that Eggy's egg shed was in the blueprints all along, and it wasn't something that was just contrived later on to make up for the fact that the original stop and swap plan had been dropped. Now, moving on to the ice key. The ice key will be transferred from Banjo Kazooie into Donkey Kong 64, where it is placed in a fridge in Donkey Kong's hut after it has been used. Banjo Tooie will retrieve the key from here. The player must activate an undecided feature in Banjo Tooie. Then a recreated Banjo Tooie cutscene shows the fridge door opening in Donkey Kong 64, allowing access to the ice key inside. So what we learn here is that a scene of the Banjo Kazooie freezer that was in Donkey Kong's hut in Donkey Kong 64 would be replicated in a cut camp in Tooie after some activity which was undecided upon at the time of this blueprint. And the ice key has already been sent from Banjo Kazooie to Donkey Kong 64 at this point. So the blueprint doesn't mention a cutscene about Woz's cave, and it doesn't mention the key going to Banjo from Donkey Kong 64. Additionally, there's no reference to what the ice key unlocks in Donkey Kong 64, or what the reward would have been behind that door that we know of in Donkey Kong 64. I will bring up the lack of Donkey Kong 64 information on this blueprint a little later on. Anyway, back to the blueprint. Once the sequence is finished, Bottles will explain the cold swap and how it works. So again, it bullet points the stop and swap process. We switch from Tooie to Donkey Kong 64. We get the ice key from the now open freezer, and then Bottles will explain switching from Donkey Kong back to Banjo Tooie, where the ice key will then appear in the stop and swap screen in Banjo Tooie. We're now treated to some top class information here that we never had, and this is really interesting. So if the process is done successfully and you do get the ice key in your Banjo Tooie game, you will then head over to Hailfire Peaks in Banjo Tooie to the location of the ice safe that contains the Super Jiggy. When you get there, a cut sequence shows the ice key flying out of Banjo's backpack and into the keyhole. The safe will open and allow players to access the Super Jiggy inside. As soon as the sequence finishes, it is followed by another. The key disappears from the keyhole, and the scene changes to wherever we decide to put the ice key for the next retrieval in the next N64 game. The player can then collect the Super Jiggy. This is added to the Jigsaw Totals screen. Bottles will pop up with a congratulatory message telling the player it must do something good if you can now complete everything else. When the player has done this, they will have 101 jiggies instead of 100, and you will get to see the special outtakes ending when Banjo Tooie receives the appropriate signal from the next Nintendo 64 game. The location where the ice key was placed becomes accessible so that the player can unplug the next N64 game, plug in Banjo Tooie, collect the ice key, unplug Banjo Tooie, and finally plug the next N64 game back in. The ice key will now be transferred to the next N64 game. So this information we never knew. So the ice vault, which was in the final game, was intended to be in the game and a part of Stop N Swop. It wasn't just a thing placed in Tooie after Stop N Swop was dropped. However, the surprise is that instead of a giant Glowbo, the Mega Glowbo, being unlocked, which would ultimately lead to unlocking Dragon Kazooie, we would actually get a Super Jiggy from the Ice Vault, which would make the Jiggy total 101. Remember, in the final game, Banjo Tooie had 90 Jiggies, and a whole stage was actually cut. A Cauldron Keep stage was scrapped, where another 10 Jiggies would have resided. So this here is what causes me to believe that the ice key also most likely unlocked the Super Gold Banana in Donkey Kong 64. This was the 201st banana and tallied to 101% in Donkey Kong 64, giving the bonus outtake ending. So it's very possible that the ice key was to go from one rare game to another, unlocking 101% and adding a bonus ending to each game. The ice key essentially being a bonus ending unlocking device. Two questions though. Would Dragon Kazooie have been unlocked via a mystery egg instead? Was Dragon Kazooie only conceived much later after Stop N Swop was dropped? If the ice key gave us the giant banana in Donkey Kong 64, would the banana fairy only reward us with cheats, which she does anyway for finding all of the fairies, and nothing else? There is also mentions of the ice key entering another location where it will rest in a frozen state until being triggered again in an unannounced future rare title. Maybe the freezer in Grunty Industries would have been a good place, or inside the ice key shaped indent of the vault itself. You know, if the ice key had ever made it to Perfect Dark 64, those cryogenic chambers in Area 51 would have been really useful. Next we move on to the gold Donkey Kong bust. There is a gold Donkey Kong bust in Donkey Kong 64 located in a glass case in Creepy Castle. This can't be got during normal gameplay. The player must activate an undecided feature in Banjo Tooie. A recreated Banjo Tooie cut sequence shows the glass case shattering in Donkey Kong 64, allowing access to the golden Donkey Kong statue inside. Once the sequence is finished, Bottles will explain how the code swap works. It will repeat this message if you return to the molehill where the undecided feature was activated. So basically it will detail stop and swapping like I mentioned earlier in chapter 9 concerning the gold bust, now that we know information about it. And again, much like with the ice key in Tooie, this is one of the only cases where we actually know what the reward was absolutely going to be at this point, and it was going to be the Donkey Kong characters in the multiplayer for Banjo Tooie. And finally we get our first hint, glimpse so to speak, of a long lost 9th Stop N Swop item, and it is the gold Banjo bust. And there was planned to be an undecided location at this point in Banjo Tooie where there would be a gold Banjo statue, and it can be seen but it can't be got during normal gameplay, much like the ice key and the gold Donkey Kong bust. And when Banjo Tooie receives the appropriate signal from whatever the next game was going to be, it would have made the statue accessible, and then stop and swap would occur with whatever the game was going to be, and the bust would have been sent to that game. Although there is a note at the bottom that states the gold banjo bust could be a different object if required. If it remains as a bust, the feature it activates when it is transferred to the next game should have something to do with banjo. So this is interesting, the implication here being that with all 6 mystery eggs hatched and used in Banjo Tooie, going forward games would now stop and swap other items such as gold statues or potentially other items from this point on. Perhaps there could have been a special gun hidden in a glass case in one game, and it would eventually be sent to Perfect Dark 64. There's not much to speculate on with the banjo bust. It clearly wasn't thought out completely and the details are vague. That brings me to Donkey Kong 64 again. The detail of the Donkey Kong bust was thought out mainly because stop and swap was already in action in Donkey Kong 64 by this stage. However, this blueprint is for stop and swap from Banjo Tooie's perspective, meaning that there could have been blueprints detailing Banjo Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64's transfer process in more detail, such as this one about Tooie. A blueprint with rewards listed and even possibly a 10th lost stop and swap item. Maybe an item not intended for Tooie, hence no reference to it on this blueprint. Maybe a 10th item intended for another rare title. So, about that mysterious empty glass porthole in the Mermaid Room. I questioned Greg Mayles and he unfortunately had nothing to offer. He said that it was possible another item could have been present and removed, but most papers and blueprints end up binned, and since he had not that much to do with Donkey Kong 64, he doesn't have any concerning it personally. Maybe there's a Donkey Kong 64 developer out there that held on to his blueprints and documents, and it details the stop and swap information. We can only hope. But this is what I meant earlier about a lack of evidence on the blueprint for Banjo Tooie's cold swap. The fact that it doesn't mention the Mermaid Room or anything else related to stop and swap. That could be a hint that there is in fact nothing there. Or it could just simply mean that the item in the Mermaid Room, if there was one, may actually have been intended for a different game entirely, so it's not on the Banjo Tooie list, which is why I would leave the door slightly ajar to the idea that there could have been a 10th stop and swap item. Anyway, that concludes our examination of the new intel of stop and swap. So here we are at the very end again. We began in 1998 and now have ended in 2025. 2026 New Year's Day as I record this. We went from knowing nothing when we first played Banjo Kazooie in 1998 to then discovering the ice key and the mystery eggs for the first time, and then on a wild 25-year journey full of discoveries, frustration, wondering if we would ever get satisfaction and any sense of conclusion to the stop and swap mystery. I can finally say that I am satisfied and at peace with it all now. For those who were not present from the beginning in 1998, this mystery, it may be tough for people to understand as to why it's been so enduring and lodged itself in so many gamers' minds. I have an interest in real world mysteries too, and ironically, Stop and Swap became a real life mystery as well, an Easter egg hunt with so many twists and turns. And while the overall picture of Stop and Swap is solved, Stop and Swap's mysteries are no longer about what it was, but they're about what it could have been. And the imagination can take it in all directions, and it could never end. So we reach a point where we have to accept it for what it is, a feature that ended before it truly even started. It's paradoxical, really. I find peace knowing that I will never know. The developers didn't even fully know. Sure, there may be a couple of loose ends, mostly pertaining to Donkey Kong 64's Stop and Swap involvement. The overall picture of Stop and Swap, though, is now complete. Sure, we may not know all of the exact rewards that may have been given to us from Banjo Tooie. The developers didn't even know. And we won't ever know what actions or events the secret Spiral Mountain switches in Banjo Tooie would have triggered. Again, even the developers don't know. They probably never even got that far. And also, we still have the Mermaid Room, and we'll never know where the Banjo Golden Bust would have gone and where it would have been located, because it was never integrated into Banjo Tooie. Stop and Swap was scrapped before they ever got a chance to incorporating it. Again, it's now about what Stop and Swap could have been and not about what it was. So, on the occasions where I do return to play Banjo Kazooie on the Nintendo 64 and I see Shark Food Island submerged quietly in the ocean, I will ponder if Blackeye did have a mission to send us there. And in Gobi's Valley, I will marvel at the ancient sealed stone door and wonder what event would finally have allowed us to access it and walk inside that eerie tomb. I'll glance at the ice key quietly rotating on its podium in solitude majestically beyond that thick sheet of ice, waiting to be collected and sent over to Donkey Kong 64 and then to Banjo Tooie. The same for the pink egg in its watery grave and the blue egg in Gobi's tomb in the sarcophagus, all waiting to be legitimately collected and sent to a location that will never happen. Forever waiting for a time that will never come. Paul mentioned in a comment the concept of an alternate timeline where Stop and Swap was allowed to go forward and the items were sent across to multiple Rare games, just like magic. And Rare's Stop and Swap on the Nintendo 64 is dead and gone. But with time and with new knowledge we have of how Stop and Swap was planned to go, we can now perhaps have talented ROM hackers recreate an interpretation of it. So that is all I have to say on gaming's greatest failed mystery. Thank you for watching.